everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and today we're going to continue on with our series for Lilly Rose Dolls, in which we're making Lillian Lamb in her lovely dress and outfit here. And we've already made the body and the limbs, we've already made the head, we've already joined all of those together, and now it's time to start and dress her. So the first thing we're going to start with is the thing that we would put on first if we were dressing her, and that's going to be her bloomers. So yeah, I'm really excited to get on with these because I really love sort of starting to make the clothes and everything all coming together. So I hope that you're enjoying this process with me too. I do want to say a really big thank you to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls, who've gifted the kit to me in order that I can bring this sew-along video to you, and I hope that you're enjoying the series. If there's any other characters you'd like to see, then please let either Claire at Lilly Rose Dolls or let myself know, and then we'll see what we can sort out between us. But yeah, this is the one that we're working on at the moment. So let me just turn the camera around and get it down, and we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is to get out your kit instructions, and you're going to need to have a look back through the pages, and you're going to need to find your pattern piece for the bloomers. Now you have to remember that with Lilly Rose Dolls patterns that you need to add the seam allowance on. So the line that is drawn for you on the pattern, the thick black line, that is actually your sewing line. And therefore I've just been in and I've just drawn in 1/4 inch seam allowance along the straight edge, around the curve here, down the side and along the hem as well. Now the way that I do that is I just use my seam gauge, which is this, or a tape measure. And all I do is put the 1/4 inch mark or 1/2 centimetre mark onto the thick black line, and then I make a mark and I just move my measure down, marking that all the way down until I get a series of dashes, and you can probably see those just at the back just there, and then I just join those together, and that's what gives me my straight line. My seam allowance. On the straight edges it's very easy because I can just draw a straight line down from the drawn line, which is the sewing line, and add my extra seam allowance on. Just remember that where you've got a fold line, you don't need to add any seam allowance. It's not going to matter too much on this. You'll just get a little bit of extra fullness in your bloomers, but generally speaking, we don't ever need to add a seam allowance onto the fold line, and you'll see why when we cut these out. So then I've been into my kit and I found the lovely white fabric here, which is this beautiful tone on tone. I'm hoping you can pick up the pattern that's on. Oh yes, you can just there, look. It's beautiful pattern in there, and it's a lovely stiff fabric. It's got a nice weight to it. I think it's a quilting cotton weight, which is fabulous. So that's what we're going to be using to cut out. So once you've added on your seam allowance and you've found your fabric, what you do need to do is you do need to trace off your pattern. Now I've got a nice big sheet of tracing paper. You can use greaseproof paper as well. It's just tissue paper, and then I've put that over the top, big sheet over the top, and I've drawn on my line, adding my seam allowance all the way round, and I've added on the markings for the fold line. I've put on that it's Lillian bloomers and I've got to cut 2, and I've also put on the line here with the double arrows on the end because that's our grain line, and we need to have that line on. Let me show you, that's the grain line just there, look. And what I've done with my grain line is I've actually extended it so it goes the full length of the pattern, pretty much, pattern piece. And so you need to cut it. Once you've got that, just cut out on your seam allowance line, and then we're ready to go in terms of working with the fabric. A little note, and you'll have heard me say this before if you've watched other of my videos, I always try and keep my master copy, the original pattern, intact, because then if ever I lose any tissue papers or it gets a bit sort of raggy when it's been used a few times, then I can always come back to my master copy, and I've got all of those pieces together on the pages stapled together, and I can just copy off what I need for my project and carry on. If you've bought a paper pattern like this and you cut on the lines and take the pattern piece out, you've no reference to come back to should you lose that pattern piece in the future. And so that's the reason why I suggested just take those extra minutes just to trace off your copy, work with your tissue paper copy, and keep your master copy intact for prosperity. So I've got my fabric out. Now the thing that I just wanted to say to you is that we've got this lovely generous piece of fabric here, but we do need quite a long piece for doing the skirt, and I'd like to keep my skirt all in one piece. and this is the skirt for the dress that goes underneath the pinafore. So before I've started looking at cutting out my pattern piece, because it would be tempting to just fold this over and to cut one out here and one out here. But in the instructions, we need a piece of fabric which is 10 inches tall by 44 inches long, and that will take you all the way to the end, to the length of this piece of fabric. So when we're cutting this out, we're going to just be careful with it, because what we're actually going to do is we're going to find our selvage edge, which is this bound edge just on the edge here. You see that with the dots going through it, sometimes you can. And we're actually going to fold that over once from this end. So that it's enough to fit our pattern piece on, with our long straight edge there going on the fold line. And then once I've done that, I'm going to fold the other side in, and I'm going to use the other selvage edge at the other end to fold in. So I'm not doing one fold, as you can see here, here's my folded edge, and use one here and one here. I'm going to do one here and one there, and this will allow me to have that 10 inches by the length of the fabric, the width of the fabric, for the skirt, for the dress. So I do just want you to take your time when you're doing that. The other thing that I'm going to do is just give this fabric a quick press, because the selvage edge is folded over and I've got some press marks, some folding packaging lines in it already. So I'm just going to get my iron out, and I'm just going to iron all of this flat, and then that'll make it lovely and easy for us to work with, and I'd suggest, if possible, you do the same. Okay, so I've ironed out most of the creases from this piece of fabric, and as I said, I'm working with the selvage edge. Now just have a little look on your fabric, because I might confuse you with the direction I'm using my fabric. Here's the cut edge, and I can see that because there are little edges, and if I pull them, they're going to want to fray. And then if you look, you've got a bound edge where it doesn't matter how much I pull, that won't fray. And the same on the other side as well, that's not fraying either. So I know that those are my selvage edges, and that's the way that the fabric is rolled onto the reels when the fabric is printed. And I've actually got one selvage edge towards me and one away from me, which might be different to how you're used to working, but it's just going to fit on my table better this moment in order for doing our pattern pieces. The first thing I want to do is roughly fold over the first edge, and I've got this so that it is wrong sides together, so that's fine, but that's fine, that doesn't matter too much. And I'm just folding it over enough so that I can fit my pattern piece on without too much wastage. Once I've worked out that my pattern piece will fit on, and there's the edge of my pattern piece there, right up against the fabric edge of the selvage edge, and we don't use the selvage edge to sew with at all, so we will avoid using that. Then I'm just going to take that off again, because I just want to make sure that my fabric is square first. So using my tape measure, I'm going to measure from the selvage edge here, where it's folded into the fabric, to the folded edge at the back here. So let's have a look and see what that is just here. So it's just under 8.5 inches there for me. So I'll just make it to 8.5, because that's a nice round figure, isn't it? Let's measure again. I've done it too little now. So let's just fold that over again. Too far now. So just getting that right, smack on 8.5, that's fine. So now I go down to the other end of my fold, and I measure again from that selvage edge, and that's just a little bit under. So I know this fabric isn't straight until both measurements measure 8.5. So that's on 8.5 now, and let me just double check this one here. Just gone up slightly under again, just when I smoothed it out, I felt it shift. So let me just try that again. Right. 8.5, 8.5, and we're good to go. So that is how you find out whether your fabric is straight or not. And you can only do it to a selvage edge, because otherwise, how do you know that the cut edge that you're measuring to is straight? If you're using a scrap of fabric from your stash, you can have a look on the back of the fabric, and you can often see the fibres running north to south or east to west, and you can make sure that your folded edge is as straight on those that one of those two orientations in order to make sure that your fabric is straight. What you're looking for is to make sure that your fabric isn't going off at an angle, and sometimes it can be quite subtle and you don't quite realise that it is or not, but it makes a big difference to the way that the fabric sits after you've made your garment. And being as we're putting all this time and effort into making these, we want to make sure that it's absolutely perfect. Now, once we've got our piece of fabric all sorted, then we can lay on our pattern piece. I'm going to go up quite close to the top here because that's nice and straight for me. And I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom, and then we get our pins and we're just going to pin. And I usually try and pin within the seam allowance to make sure that that's going to sit nicely. And then I just pin all the way around just to keep this nice and flat. So this is going to give us one side, or one leg if you like, of our pantaloon. So we do need to do this again on the other side. I'll do that in a moment with you. Let's just get this one first. And as you remember, I'm leaving this section here all free for the skirt, because we want the skirt on the dress to have that uninterrupted fabric piece without having to have a seam in it at all. Doesn't matter if you have to put a seam in, but it's just better if you don't. Once you've got that sorted, then you're going to get your scissors and we can cut out this pattern piece, because we're happy that the grain line is straight. The other thing that you can do as well on your pattern piece to make sure once you've got your grain line straight is you can measure from the fold of the fabric to the grain line, but generally speaking, so long as your fold is correct, you don't need to measure up with that line because you're on the fold, and that should then be straight for you. So let me just cut this out just quickly now. I'm cutting as neatly as I can do, because that again will affect the finished result. Move this piece of paper around. My pins are holding it nice and flat for me. Just take your time around the curve. I was neating it up afterwards, and I'll just neaten mine up just slightly. Sometimes it's easier from one angle than it is from the other. Okay, I'm just take that piece of fabric. I don't really need that. Okay. So now what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go to the other side of the piece of fabric. I'm going to fold that over as well. And we know we needed 8.5 in, and we've got the selvage edge again, so that's fine. So now I'm going to measure 8.5 inches for our other piece. And I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to cut out this other piece of fabric once I've made sure that my fabric is straight. Right, just put it over that way. Get that straight. I'm just going to take these pins out and put the pattern piece back on again, but this time, because my fold is this side, then I'm going to turn my pattern piece over so the writing is down, and then that will make sure I've got the same orientation on my fabric. Just make sure that when you're doing yours, you cut on the same bit as well, you know, whereas we've got this top bit here, because we want to leave this long strip free on the both sides. So just make sure you're not cutting one off down there, because you're going to jinx yourself for your long piece for your skirt. And then once you're happy again that you're all straight, pattern piece can go on with that fold line, edge of the fold line straight onto there. And I usually put sort of a pin at the top and a pin at the bottom, just in order that that pattern piece isn't going to twist, and then I can put the rest of the pins in order to keep that nice and straight and flat for me. Okay, so I'm just going to cut out this piece, and then we'll have our 2 legs in order to make our bloomers, and I'll meet you back here once you've done the same. Okay, so I've just taken the pattern piece off my fabric, and because we cut them in half, this is what they're going to look like. Because the pattern piece was folded in half, when you open them out, you're going to get 2 legs the same as this. Now, because the pattern is quite difficult to see which is the right side or the wrong side, I'm going to put a pin in my right side in order just to remind me. And I usually put it in double like that, just to remind me. And this is really important when you've got a left or a right. And on here I can see that one side of the fabric is printed on and the other side isn't. So the side that's been printed on is my top side. So I've just got my 2 top pieces marked like this. It just makes sure that you don't get one leg that's the wrong way round and the other leg that's the right way round. And it is very, very close to knowing which side is which. Let me have another, just a double check just to make sure that I'm absolutely right. Oh, no, I was wrong on this one. Look, this one's the right way round. So good job I checked. And just double check this one as well. Yeah, no, that's right. Okay, so just double check yours and just make sure that you've got your fabric. Using your glasses or getting really close up to it will help you determine that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start and work on this bottom edge first. Let's just put our pattern piece to one side because we've finished with that for the moment. I'm going to turn it over to the right side, so the right side is down, and then I'm going to use my ironing mat and my iron, being careful not to burn myself. And we're going to turn up 1/4 inch on the edge of this piece of fabric. Now the way that I do it is I use my little seam gauge and I will measure up that 1/4 inch and I will stick a pin in it through into my press mat, and that will hold that steady for me and just helps me not burn my fingers. So you can just go along. Now you can pin as well into an ordinary ironing board cover, but just make sure that you're happy to do so. Otherwise you can get a piece of another fabric or something underneath and just press it down. And then once I've gone down as far as I can for my pressing mat, and you could go diagonally on your pressing mat and you'd get further across. I just didn't start that way, so I won't change it now. And then I'm just going to use my iron. I'm pressing that up to the wrong side by that 1/4 inch in between the pins first, and then what I do is just lift those pins out, and then you can just go over it again and it just makes sure you catch in between where those pins were. Now I am ironing this up, pressing this up before we've zigzagged the edge, because when you zigzag the edge sometimes you can lose some width on your fabric, and I don't want to take up any more than is meant to take up. So by pressing this sort of like memory into the fabric first, it does just make sure that we don't take too much up when we're working with this fabric. Okay, and you'll see what I mean by memory in the fabric in a second, because now I can fold that out and we've got a lovely pressed line there that tells me where that 1/4 inch is. So I'm going to put this in the sewing machine now, and once I've pressed the other one, and I'm just going to sew a zigzag stitch along this edge here with it just single. I folded it out, and then when we fold it under with the lace, then we'll catch that hem down when we add the lace on the bottom. So let me just go ahead and press this other leg in the same way, and then I'll meet you back at the sewing machine when we're ready to do that zigzag. Okay, so I'm ready to go with my sewing machine. I'm going to put the right side of my fabric up, but I'm going to fold out the little hem that we just turned under, just pressed under, and I'm going to line it up with my presser foot. Now I'm going to put my stitch onto the correct one for zigzag, and then I'm going to just zigzag across this. Now my zigzag automatic setting is at a 5, and that's going to be too wide, so that's on the width of how far it goes across your fabric. So I'm going to take that down to a 3.5, and then the stitch length is a 2, which will be about right, I think. So we'll carry on with that. So my setting is a zigzag stitch with a width of 3.5 and a length of 2. So let's just start that off, and we're just going to sew all the way along here so that the zig is going into the fabric and that the zag is going off into the gap over the end of the fabric. So you just sort of neaten that off. When we come to the end, we don't need to double reverse on the end here. When we come to the end, I'm just going to take my other leg, fold that one out the same way, and I'm just going to sort of butt it up underneath the presser foot and carry across from one to the other. It's needle out of the work, and then we can just cut off our threads. Got a very small one in between there, which is great. And then cut off our starting threads, which is there. Okay, The next thing then that we're going to do is we're going to just fold that under again, just so that we've got just back along the line that we've already pressed. And you can see hopefully you can see my little zigzag stitches on the end and how they've come off. You will get one or two little what I call whiskers here at the end, can you see? And all you need to do with those is just go along with your line, just run your finger along, just ruffle up any that are going to be there and just take those off as well. It just helps neaten up that edge. You shouldn't get any more once you've been down your line once. Try not to cut through your zigzag stitches whilst you're doing this. You're just literally just taking the ends off those loose threads, and that'll just help neaten that up. Okay, so let's just fold that hem across for that memory again, and then we're going to find our lace from our kit. I've got mine here. I've taken the 1 metre piece of lace. And then what we're going to do, let's just turn this over so the right side is up, and we know it's the right side because my pin's there. And then I've got this little edge on the edge there, you can see the laces, and I'm going to take it right to the edge. And I'm just going to overlap this bit here onto my seam. Take it right up to the edge. And I'm going to have the edge of the lace on the edge of the fabric. Let me turn it around this way. This will probably be better because if I'm right-handed, so that'll help me just lay it down. And that's the way we're going to sew it as well. So when I'm pinning it, I'm pinning that 1/4 inch seam allowance under as well. As you can see, it's getting caught with my pin, and then we'll be able to sew this lace on at the bottom here, and that will then attach that all nicely. Just has to be flat because when we put the elastic around the legs, then this lace will gather up. It'll become frilly with the gathers from the bottom of the legs around the ankle. One more pin, I think, and that should do it. So that's what mine's looking like. You should be able to just see the line going across the bottom of the hem there. And then because we're going to be doing the other one as well, I'm going to put this leg down, just put it up against the lace so we don't lose any lace. So you can do them separately. Let's do them separately, probably easier for you guys, won't it? So just snip your lace off there in line with that bottom seam, and then you're going to just pin the lace onto your other leg in exactly the same way, straight from the edge all the way along. And then we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and then we're going to do a row. Should I do a zigzag stitch? I think I might do a zigzag stitch, I think, just to make sure that it sits down nicely. You can do a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch, really. My concern with just doing one row of zigzagging stitches one row of straight stitches is that if I go too close to the tops in order to get the hem to go down, then the lace could flick up over the edge of the hem there. Whereas if I use a zigzag stitch, it's going to sort of attach it top and bottom at the same time. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Okay, when we get to the end, I'm just going to snip off my lace again, just flush with the leg of the trouser, and then I'm going to save the lace because this will either do the front of the bodice or it'll do a sleeve as well, won't it, later on. So keep hold of your lace because you're going to need that for later on. So let's go back to our sewing machine. Let me have a look at that 3.5. That's probably okay actually. So I'm going to keep to the same settings that I neatened the edge with. I'm just going to poke my lace underneath the edge of my fabric there, underneath my presser foot. And I'm still on my zigzag, and I'm on a 3.5 by 2. And because it's white, you shouldn't then see the edge of the, because it's on 3.5, and I'm thinking, yes, it shouldn't go over the edge of your hem. And because the thread is white as well, then it's going to stay nicely and be almost invisible. I'm just going to reverse on the end there. Take our needle out of the work, and I'll show you how this looks, because that looks quite nice on there. starting thread. So that's how mine looks with the zigzag. I think you can hardly see any difference on there, so I think that looks okay. So once you've done one leg, then we're going to go on and we're going to do exactly the same thing with the second leg. Okay, so now that we've got the two legs with their lace on the bottom, I now know which is the right side of my fabric because the wrong side has the hem turned up to it, so I can take my pins out marking the right side and the wrong side. The other thing is that I wouldn't do your neatening and attaching your lace in one pass because I think that's too much to try and achieve to get a neat result. So I do think that you are better off neatening the hem of your fabric first for your hem and then turning it up and attaching your lace afterwards. And I do think that'll just be a little easier for you and give you a nicer finish. So the next thing that we're going to do now is just make a little channel for the elastic to go in, and let's have a look and see how high up it has to be. 3/4 of an inch up we have from the bottom edge. So let's just have a little look and have a look on the back side of our fabric, and it's 3/4 of an inch up, and we're just going to put a little pin just to start and mark a line for us so that we can see where we're needing to go up. So I'm doing from the bottom of the turned up hem, not the bottom of the lace, and then we're just going to measure that and just make sure I've got this right. Yeah. And if you wanted to, you could draw a chalk line if you wanted to. That would be another way of marking it. Or if you're careful, then we can use the pins and we can avoid using the pins. Well, we don't want to run over the pins when we're doing this. So just doing a little line just to mark it. So I'm putting the pins in at 3/4 of an inch up from this bottom edge of the turned up hem, and that will then give us a line to work to. Oops, folded over, there we go. We mark the other one up and then I'll come back to you and we'll be able to do our zigzagging in order to mark the elastic. And so when we're ready, I'm going to widen the zigzag on my elastic. I'm going to put the stitch length up to a 4, and I'm going to, stitch width up to a 4, and my stitch length I'm going to take down to a 1.5, so it gives us a nice channel to go through. So then I'm going to then line up my presser foot with the pin. So I've got a line on my presser foot here that I'm going to use for mine, and I'm going to reverse just at the start and the stop. Just a couple of stitches, reverse, start and stop, so that doesn't come undone. And then I'm going to follow the line of my pins. So when I come close, then I'm going to just start and slide that one out. Follow where it is, needle in the work so that we can keep track of where we are. Reverse at the end again. So we've just got to stitch across with our zigzag stitch just like that. So it's just through the single length and it's just marking that zigzag. Take off our starting and stopping threads, and then we're going to do the same with the other one. And then you want to go and get your shearing elastic. I'll show you what shearing elastic is in a second. It's what you do sheer dresses with, and we're going to later on we're going to shear that, thread that through with a darning needle through the back of those zigzags, and that will hold and gather in our fabric for us like this. But I've got to just go and find mine because I'm not quite sure where it is, so I will go and find that in a second. Okay, so I've done both of my legs now. They're both at the same stage, and so what I'm going to do now is, before we start to sew these together, it's always easier to turn over the top and give that, you remember the memory we gave on the bottom of the hem? We're going to do that now on the top here because that will be easier to do now whilst the fabric is in the flat before we turn it into a circle. So what we're going to do now is just going to get our ironing board again and our iron. And we're going to then carefully, now Claire doesn't give instructions for how much to turn over, just make sure you've got your wrong side facing up, which I have. And I think that I'm going to turn over 1/4 of an inch first to give us like a double hem. So let's fold over 1/4 of an inch first in exactly the same way as we did before. Let me just move this across and I'll be able to get the whole way across in one pass then, won't I? So remember to put your pins through into your pressing mat, and that will then make it easier for you to hold this and press this flat. I do a pin probably every couple of inches or so. I find that works really quite well. You don't get many fluctuations then or variations in how this is going to be sitting. Sometimes if you go too big a gap between your pins, then your fabric starts to distort along that length. So let's just press in between those pins first. We can take out these pins, we'll use those again in a minute. So again, now I've got the pins out, a little bit of a press, a little bit of a steam, just to give it that memory. And then I'm going to turn it over 1/2 an inch. So 3/4 of an inch in total has gone on this hem, but 1/2 an inch I think will be about right. Getting a nice channel for our elastic to go through. So again, put your pins in along the length, pins are in the way. And that will then press that again, and that will give that memory for this top edge. And we're going to of course repeat this because we're doing 2 legs and they're both exactly the same. Then we can just do exactly the same with the other side as well. First press down first, take your pins out, and then without the pins in just go down it again, and that will just make sure that that just really holds that all in place for you. Okay, so once you've done that on one, so there's our double fold if you look, just blow it to blow. So there's our first little 1/4 of an inch hem here, and then we've got 1/2 an inch for our second, so that when we fold that under and fold that under and we sew on the edge, that gives us a lovely nice neat edge on our waistband. Okay, so that's what I'm going to just press the other one first, and then I'll show you how we layer these up. Okay, so I've just ironed these, so now what we're going to do is going to put them together, right sides together. So make sure you've got the right side with your lovely lace all nice and neatly finished off on there. And then what we're going to do is you're going to fold out your waistband. So where we've got those creases in, you're going to fold it out so that you've got your raw edge at that top waist edge. And we're going to put a pin in there. And we're going to have a pin at the bottom here where the 2 legs meet as well. And that should all match. Pin that. Just make sure your raw edges are together and your fabric's on top of each other. And if you want to, you can go ahead and pin this side as well at the same time. Just fold out that waist edge with those creases. And those folds should line up perfectly on top of each other. Put a pin in. Go down to the bottom of your, to the point between the legs, the bottom of that curve. Just the curved edge that we're putting on top of each other, and the curved edge that we're going to be sewing first. So when you're finished, you'll end up with your fabric looking like this. So there's our folded edge at the top, and we've got 2 rows of pins on these 2 curved edges just here. Then we're going to put it into the sewing machine. We're going to take it off our zigzag stitch, so we're onto a straight stitch only, and we want to sew this with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And we're just going to do a straight stitch. So let's do a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, just to hold this together. And then needle in the work so that we know where we are. So I've got a everything's going to tip off my desk. So I've got a button on my machine where it leaves every time I stop sewing, my needle will stay in my work. But if you've not, in my fabric, but if you've not got that, you can use the hand crank on the side, the hand wheel, and you can then just, when you stop, you can then just get used to just making sure that needle's in the work. Because down here, we've got to go round this curve, and we're going to do something called pivoting. So let's just sew our seam first, just while it's on the flat. Don't go over your pins, just stop for your pins. And I can see my fabric starting to curve away. So what we're going to do now is take out that latest pin, and I'm going to follow the curve with a point on my presser foot until the fabric wants to start and bunch up. If I move it anymore, I'm going to get it bunched up underneath my fabric bunched up underneath the presser foot. And then I'm going to leave my needle in the work, lift up my presser foot and just change the direction slightly so that my mark is always on the edge of the fabric. And that is how we sew curves, nice and neat and smooth. You just have to, the more tight the curve is, the more times you'll need to stop and adjust. But as you go along, you'll get used to doing this. It just becomes second nature in the end. Get that final pin out, and then we can straighten up, and then we're off to the end here. And just reverse at the end. So needle out of the work, and then we're going to cut off those threads. And then we're going to turn our fabric over, and we're going to do exactly the same on this other side, including that pivoting. So line it up for your 1/4 inch seam allowance, forward and back. Start needling the work just so that we know where we are. And then this one. So starting to come to that curve again. See my needle stopping in my work, and then start curving around this edge. Right, it's too tight, it's starting to bunch, so lift up the presser foot, twist the fabric, do a few stitches, a few more, until eventually you're straight again, and then you can then go off the edge. Out of the work. Just take off our starting and stopping threads. So that's what we've got at the moment. Those two seams have been sewn, but what we need to do first is we're just going to neaten these seams off now whilst we've got it in the flat. Again, it's easier to do it now than it is to try and do it later. So let's go back to our zigzag stitch. I'm going to take my width down to a 3.5 and my length is at a 2, that will be fine. And I'm just going to sew down these edges again. And just to say, one side of my zigzag is going in my fabric and the other side is just off. And again, we're going to use that pivot technique just here. You don't need to reverse at the end because we're going to be sewing another seam on top of that. Let's just fold this over. Let's just do the other side. So zigzag the other side in exactly the same way. So that's the two sides now sewn down and neatened. What we're going to do now is take your long edge where your lace is, and we're actually going to pull that apart, and then we're going to fold the waist down. So this is going to be your waist, and these are going to be the legs of your bloomers. So where you've done your seam allowance between the legs, we're just going to put those together, but put one side of your seam allowance one way and one side the other way. So if you can see that, I've got this bottom seam allowance going towards the left, and the top seam allowance is going towards the right, and that should mean that you get a really nice junction at that crotch point. Just putting that together, and then we're going to go down our legs, and hopefully your legs will be identical lengths because you've done your measuring correct when you've done your hems. So you're going to put a pin in there, and then we're going to come down to the other side as well, and we're going to make sure they're all nice and even, and thank you, they have turned out nicely. And then that's fine. If you want to put another pin in the middle here, feel free to do so. You use as many pins as you need to feel comfortable that everything's going to stay nice and steady for you. So let me just show you how that looks. So here's our legs with our lace at the bottom, and these are our two legs, left and right. And then this here, where we did that memory with the seam allowance, is where our waist is going to be. So we're doing the seam that runs between the legs. So back to our sewing machine, back onto a straight stitch, and with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance we're going to start on the lace and we're going to sew that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way up those legs. Reverse at the bottom when you start. Doesn't like the lace very much, so just take your time with that. Mine's wanting to eat my lace. Okay. Mine has eaten my lace. So if this happens to you, you can try and manipulate it out, but if you try and pull too far, you're going to ruin your fabric. So this is another good little tip as to what might happen. So in with your gadgets, I've got something that looks like this, which is a screwdriver. First of all, switch your power off and make sure your foot's away from your presser foot, your pedal. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to loosen off this plate. This is the only way to get this fabric out without ripping your lace. And this might have happened to you. I've got a couple of tips that we can use to make sure it doesn't happen again. So take that screw out. Keep it somewhere very safe, because you're going to need it again in a minute. Just that one, I think, on mine. Yeah. I'm going to take out the bobbin cover first, just flick that one out, and then this whole plate should lift up. So the whole plate has lifted up from under my sewing machine, can you see? And we can see that the fabric has gone right the way through, and you can see how fixed that is with a nice little bobble of stitches under there. Let me just clip my threads off just so I'm not wasting that. You see how thick that is under there? And so now we can pull it through, but if we'd have tried to have pulled it through while it was in the machine, I think we would have spoilt our lace, which we didn't want to do. So let's just take these stitches off, these threads off, and just straighten out our lace as best as we can. And now let me just rethread my machine. So I'll just take that bobbin thread out for a minute. So in order just to put this back on again, I'm just going to slide that back on again into place, take my little screw and then screw it back on again. Because sometimes it's not about not going, I mean, you could consider this as going wrong. I mean, it's just one of those things. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But if you know that how to do this without ruining your fabric, then it is a good little tip. Then just use your little screwdriver. And you have to use a little one because you haven't got much room between here and here in order to tighten that up. But that's also why I want you to switch off your machine before you do this, because you don't want to put your foot on your pedal by mistake, or a pet put their foot on the pedal by mistake and make the needle work when you don't want it to. So let's just, a little bit of fluff there. Let me just switch my machine back on again, needle down and up again, and that'll pull up my thread, bottom thread, and put my bobbin cover on. Everything's all good to go again. So in terms of a tip, let me just get some tissue paper, because that would be one way of doing this. So what happens is that the fabric is pulled down into the, because there's not enough of an edge to pull the fabric through and for it to glide across your plate, it gets pulled through into your machine. So you can either put some paper underneath, like that, and then that should give it enough to hold on to so it doesn't pull it through. Let's have a go and see if we can do this. So I can see the 1/4 of an inch through. Oops, squeaky noises. And let's try again. So that's going to go forwards. And you can pull on the little stick. Can you see how I just pulled on the threads at the back just to help it through? So that stopped it from being pulled through. Needle in the work before we take any pins out. So we're just going to carry on sewing. Make sure your seam allowances stay down underneath, and then you can pull the legs flat so you've got a straight seam to sew. Before we get to the end, I'm just going to use another piece of paper to just go over this lace. So it's just tissue paper that I use to trace off the pattern. I'm sewing through the paper as well, and then reversing back to to do that lace. Let's take the threads off, start and bottom. If you're not sewn through paper, it feels really strange at first, but there's my piece of paper, and now I can just pull that off and it should just pull away just nice and neatly. There we go. And that stopped that from being pulled down into the machine. The next thing that we're going to be doing now is we're going to zigzag, but in order that we try and protect these ends, what I suggest we do is start at the crotch point, which is the point between the legs, and we're going to go back onto our zigzag stitch, and I'm onto my 3.5 and my 2, and start in the middle here, and then I'm going to just neaten down this edge. And all the way down to the bottom of my lace and reverse. So that's one done. If you've got any whiskers again like this, just take those off just to neaten that up. And then I'm going to take off my starting threads, turn my bloomers over, so I've got the other side up now so that we can go down the other side, and I'm starting at that same point again. I am going to reverse this time. That's it, just a couple of stitches is enough. That's broken my thread for me, but that's okay. We've got enough down there just to neaten that off, so that's fine. Take off the start and stop threads. Okay, so we've actually got a pair of trousers now. If you look, we've got 2 legs that are completely sewn, and we've got a waist in here. So the next thing that we're going to do is, before we go on and do anything else, we're just going to tack down this waist seam here, because that will help us when we are threading our elastic through. So let me just load up my thread again, just to use my needle threader, which is nice and quick and easy. That's it. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is just flatten the seam allowance down to one side or the other, and then just run a row of stitches, just straight stitches just along here. They're just really just tacking stitches. We can take them out afterwards if we want to. So let's take our stitch off the zigzag. And we are just going to, I'm not going to reverse, I'm just going to just do 3 stitches. That's it. And it has made a nest on the back, but being as I'm going to take these stitches out, I'm not too concerned. And then on the back here, that one's wanting to go that way, so let's just put that one in as well and just tack that one down too. It just means that when you're trying to go around with your elastic, you're not trying to navigate over seam allowance. Okay, take our start and stop threads off. Okay, so that's what that looks like on the outside. Just got a few stitches just going down there, and it's just holding that seam allowance flat for me for when we do a bit later on. So, next thing then that we're going to do now is we're going to refold over this way. So remember the 1/4 inch we folded over first, so fold that over first, then find your 1/2 inch memory line, and let's just put a pin in just to hold that. So put those in at right angles to the seam, and we're just going to go around making sure that bottom edge is tucked under and that we've got a nice edge here that we can turn under. And this cotton does hold a lovely, lovely ironing memory to it on that crease. So it'll make it lovely for you to be able to work with. So just a little bit more care where you've got your seam allowance. Just folding that over. All the way around that waist edge. I think we'll use our red pin trick as well to leave a little gap. So I'm not going to use that pin then because that's the red one. So I've got a red pin here, so I'm going to put a red pin at one side of that seam allowance, and I'm going to put a red pin on the other side. So that is to remind me where I'm going to start and stop. All my other pins, oh, and I've got some other red ones, but I'm going to remember that these two close together on this side of the seam allowance are where I'm going to start and stop. And then what I'm going to do next, we're on a straight stitch. I'm going to move my needle across to the left. And I don't know if yours has got a free arm or not, because what you can do is you can either put your trousers, your pantaloons, bloomers, inside out, so you can see the edge of where you're wanting to sew and line that up. Or if you've got a free arm where you take off the edge like this, then it's quite nice and easy to keep them the wrong way round, and you can thread them over the edge with the waistband, and then that will just line up. And you're wanting to leave just a small gap, enough to be able to put the elastic. So I'm probably going to leave about 3/4 of an inch in the end. And I'm going to start where I am just here. So I've got my needle to the left, and I've got a line on the edge of my seam allowance here, the folded waistband. And I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward. Hold on a second, let me just take that over that way a little bit, that's fine. And then a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work just to hold that steady. And then now we can just keep it nice and steady. We come to a pin, we stop and take that out, and we carry on past. And you're trying to be on the bottom edge of this fold over where you folded over your seam allowance, and I'm just keep rolling the fabric towards me so that I can sew that nice and neat. Got a nice run at it. Sometimes just a bit easier than trying to work inside the crease. Just take your time over your seam allowance. Try not to make your channel any smaller. And if you need to, just put a little bit of pressure on the back of the fabric with your back hand here. Try and keep that all nice and neat. That's not the right red pin. Coming up to where we started, and we put our red pin in there just to remind us to stop. Just going to go a little way past it, and then I'm just going to reverse again, just for a couple of stitches. Needle out of the work, and let's take off our threads. So that's where I've sewn mine. So there's the folded edge, and there's my row of stitches just right on the edge, because that gives us the maximum amount in this channel then to be able to thread our elastic through. Okay, so to all intents and purposes we've got a finished pair of pantaloons. We just need to turn them round so that they're the right way round, and we need to get our elastic, and then we're going to thread the elastic through the legs, and we're going to thread the elastic through the waist. So that's there, looking all lovely. You can press these seams as well if you want to. Might be an idea, mightn't it, just to have them so that they're sitting just nicely. Just be careful of your lace. If you've got a high temperature on for your cotton on your iron, you might melt your lace if you're not careful, and you really don't want to be doing that. Okay, let me just grab some elastic and then we'll get on with some more. Okay, I'm going to do my waist first, and for that I've got this elastic here, which is your traditional corded elastic, and this is 1/4 inch wide, so that's going to fit very nicely inside that channel. So let's just take our lovely model here, which is Lillian, and let's just measure the elastic around her waist to see how much we're going to need. We want it to sort of sit together but not be too tight but not fall down, and we need to remember that we need to have a little bit to be able to sort of sew together in order to make a seam. And because she's got a little bottom on her and a little tummy on her, then that's probably about right. We can always adjust this later, so I'll measure this in a second and I'll tell you what measurement I've used. Does anybody want any elastic? I have just a smidge. And so this piece of elastic here is, let's have a look, it's about 10.5 inches long for her waist. And then what I do with that is I get my, you're going to need 2 safety pins. You need one small one to be able to go through the channel. Perhaps that, or not, it's not going to work. This one will probably work. So just thread that, put an elastic, the pin onto your elastic at the end there, just like that, just gone through. And then we're going to use a pin to attach the elastic to our trousers. Let's find our little hole that we've left in our little gap that we've left in our waistband, which is there. And then the end that hasn't got the pin on at the moment, I'm just going to pin that to the seam allowance on the inside, because I've pulled it through so many times after myself that I don't want you to do the same. So there it is, that's just pinned that one edge just there temporarily. Then we've got our other end here. We're going to thread the pin into the channel, and then if you sort of hold the end of the pin with one finger, you can use your finger and your thumb to push the fabric over, and then you can let go and sort of hold onto the pin that end, and then you'll pull the elastic through. So it's a bit like a caterpillar, kind of inching along and then pull along. So push the pin through, feed the elastic over the pin, and then you can then just let go. It does take a little bit of practice, but once you've got it, then hopefully you're familiar with this technique anyway, and you'll be able to do it. So we're going to come up to the seam allowance, and this is why we've folded over that seam allowance and just tacked it down, because sometimes it gives you a bit of a blind end if you're not careful and you can't find your way through where your seam allowance has been. But with it tacked down, generally you can find your way through nice and easily. Just keep feeling it through. And now you can see that why we've got this end secured down, because if we kept pulling this elastic through, this end would just follow us through, and you'd be on a continuous loop then, always trying to thread your elastic through. Make sure you've got clean fingers working with all this white fabric as well. I should have said that at the beginning, shouldn't I? So when you get to the beginning again, you're going to find your space and you're just going to poke your pin out through that hole again that you left in the fabric. And we can take off this pin now, but don't let go of your elastic, because it will shoot back up inside because we've got some tension on it now. And we're going to go to the other piece of elastic and undo that pin, and being very careful to make sure that we're holding on to both pieces of elastic before we release that pin. You're then going to pin those 2 pieces of elastic together. Just put your safety pin through both of them. Because what I want to do now is just make sure that the elastic is flat all the way through. So just feel in with your fingers all the way along the elastic, and just make sure that that elastic is sitting flat and hasn't got twisted. Because if it's twisted and then we sew this together, it's going to stay twisted. So mine's flat, so that's good. So then what we can do is, so I know that that's flat now, so I can pull that so to give me some room to work with. And we're going to have a needle and thread that's got some white thread on it. You can do this under the machine, but it does tend to be quite fiddly when you're trying to do it under the machine. So I would suggest that you do consider just doing a few stitches by hand. It doesn't take long to do it all. Just put a knot on the end there. And then what I want you to do is still making sure that your elastic is going to be flat. It's not going to shoot back inside on you. You're going to overlap the ends like that. So you can see mine both are coming out nice and flat. And now I'm just going to overlap those ends about 1/2 inch and hold them with my finger and thumb so they're overlapping. And now I'm just going to start at one end and take a few over stitches over the edge of the elastic. And then when I've done one side, I'm just going to go across and just do it over the other side as well. There are all sorts of ways of sort of joining the elastic with a piece of fabric or doing it under the machine. Just do whichever you like to do to join your elastic, but this way has always worked for me, and it will work quite well for you too, I think. Once you get to the end again, just do a few stitches in place just to sort of anchor off that end, and then you can snip off that thread. And then all you're going to do is just pull on the two sides of your waistband and that elastic should go in. The one thing that we didn't do was we didn't try them on her, did we? Oops, sorry. So let's just try them on her. Let's just pop these inside, her tummy inside and her legs inside here, and see how they're sitting. So you could probably get away with being a little bit looser if you wanted to. Sorry, a little bit tighter if you wanted to, but they're not falling down. So I'm going to leave mine as they are. So that was 10.5 inches, wasn't it, of elastic? But if you wanted a little bit less, then you could do. It's up to you as to where you want these to sit, but I think that's going to sit quite nicely. So that's fine. So let's take those back off you again. Thank you very much, Lillian, for being our model. Just pop her to one side. And then I'm going to just put this into the machine again. I'm going to poke the elastic so that it's up towards the folded edge of the elastic channel. Let's just put my safety pins away as well. We've got those for another day. Put one there. Another little take away tub as well, just for using for these things. And then we'll make sure you're on a straight stitch, which we are. And then we're just going to pull the elastic. So pull so your gathers are all to the side and that your elastic is pushed up towards this top folded edge. And then you can put your fabric back in again, join your stitches, reverse here, sew across the gap and reverse at the end again. And that will just neaten that off and just close that gap up for you. Careful over that seam allowance and then reverse that. Just take off our threads. Just closes up that gap so that you've not got that loose. And the other thing that I want to do is just using my quick unpick and my glasses is where we put those few stitches in just to hold that seam allowance down on the waist. They're just not very neat. So I'm just going to just unpick those just slightly, well, not just slightly, completely, and just take those out because we don't need those. You can leave them in, it doesn't matter if you wanted to leave them in, but this is just where it's holding the seam allowance to one side while we threaded the elastic. Well, we've finished threading the elastic now, so we're done with those. And they should pull out just quite nicely for you. If you get down to the bottom, you can always just snip it off when it's nice and close to the edge. It's just tidying up after ourselves, isn't it, as we go along. So take the thread out from inside. And then that's all nice and neat and you'd never tell those stitches were there. Okay, so next we've got to do the leg elastic. So let me just finish taking these out and then we'll come back and we'll do the leg elastic. Now, I haven't been able to find my shearing elastic. So if you've got shearing elastic, then you can use that. But if not, I'm going to show you the other elastic that I'm going to use for mine. Sometimes we haven't got the right thing, so we have to compromise, don't we? Improvise, that's the word, not compromise. So to do this, I'm going to pop these back onto our lovely model Lillian. That's the front, that's fine. So I've just chosen that the bit where I've double sewn it at the back, putting the elastic in, is at the back. And then in here, I've got some little knicker elastic, which is like this. Now, you could when you were doing your zigzags, you could have stretched the elastic and sewn that on as you went. That is one option of doing it. Or if you've got shearing elastic, you're just going to get a darning needle, which will be like this one here. So something like that one. Oops, hold it there for you so you can see. Darning needle. It's what you use for sewing up knitted garments. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use this red wolf to show you, because I haven't got any shearing elastic. But if you thread your darning needle through, and just make sure you get through all of your stitches as you go, and you should be able to, the same way that we threaded the safety pin through the channel, you can thread your shearing elastic through behind the back of the zigzag stitches, and it will then pull it through and follow through after you. You see it going through the channel. And if you've got your shearing elastic threaded through, you'll then be able to do a few stitches on your seam allowance, and that will just secure those stitches down for you, that seam allowance, and as it goes through it will gather up for you. And as you might imagine, it probably would be easier to take these off Lillian to do it, but you're going to have to put them back on again in order to work out how tight you want to have the gathers on the bottom of her legs anyway, so that's the reason why I've kept mine on just for now. But hopefully you can see this works really well to get that through. If you've not got enough elastic, you could always have stretched the elastic while you were sewing your zigzags, and then attach the elastic with your zigzag stitches at the same time. I'll probably have to go over mine and just do that, I think, with mine. So perhaps I'll show you that way as well on the other leg, so that you've got a comparison. Oops, needle's poked out. Just try and keep your needle inside all your stitches as you go, and that will just help you. I think I'm making it look harder than it actually is. Nearly round to the beginning again. But you can see what kind of effect you get with the gathering and once that's on elastic, then you'll be able to take that on and off her leg very nicely like that. Can you see? And then when you get round to the beginning again, just do a few stitches just to over sew on your seam allowance, and then thread the end on when you've got to the other side, so that you can adjust your gathers on your elastic in order to see how tight you want it to be. And just bear in mind that if you want to get it off her foot, then you do need to make sure that you can get this off her foot as well before you cast off, and then thread the elastic onto your needle at the other side, and then do a few stitches as well. So that's how you would do that. Let me just take this off for now. So the way I'm going to do mine is I'm going to use this elastic here, if I can find the end again. I know it's here somewhere. Here it is. And I'm going to measure around her ankle, which is sort of like a quite nice area, but holding on to the two ends, I can then make sure that that's going to come off her leg nicely, which it is. So once I've got an amount measured, snip that off, and then I'm going to then snip off the other side. So we've got two lengths the same, so they get equal gathers. Put my elastic away for the other side. I need to get you undressed again, Lillian, sorry. Pop her to one side, because then what I'm going to do now is we are going to join this elastic into a round. So put your two raw edges together. Let's put this under the sewing machine just to make this into a round. Just hold the edges together. Just get stuck a bit on your feed dogs, but you'll get there. One finger one side of your presser foot, one finger the other, and then you should be able to go backwards and forwards a couple of times just to hold that together, because we're going to be sewing it in anyway, so it's fine. You're going to do the same with the other one. And then before you start to put it on, where your join is, fold it in half and put a pin on the halfway point, just down in the elastic like that. And then put the join and the pin together and fold it, and that will give you your quarter marks. Here's a quarter here. Oops. And here's a quarter just here. Okay, because now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same with the legs. So we've got our seam under leg seam there. Let's mark the other side of the half. Let's do it on the inside where that line is, where that zigzag line is. And then you're going to put your seam and your pin together and then flatten it out, and that's going to give you your quarter points. Because we want to match up these edges to get these points together. Put that one in there, the other one just here. So we've just used those pins just to mark those quarter points. It just has to be approximate. It doesn't have to be absolutely spot on if you don't want, if it doesn't work out for you. Then we've got our ring of our elastic. So the first thing we're going to do is on our zigzag line on the inside, we're going to put the join line on that zigzag of zigzags that we did earlier, and put a pin in just to hold it. Then go to the halfway point, find your pin, put the two pins together on the inside, take out one pin and put one pin to hold the elastic in place on your fabric on that zigzag line. Make sure you're on your zigzag line, and then go to your quarter points and do exactly the same thing. So pins on top of each other, and then make that then work there, and then onto this quarter point, the last one. And what you end up with is that you've quartered your elastic, you've got the same amount of elastic on all four quadrants of this leg then. Can you see how that is? So when we stretch this to sew it, we've got the same amount to gather at each point. I'll put my pins out of the way. And we're going to use a zigzag stitch again for this. And you don't want it to be too tight together because we're just attaching the elastic. It doesn't need to be too tight together. So I'm going to have a width of 3.5 on mine, and I'm going to have a length of say 2.5, and that should be right, I think, for that. We'll soon find out, won't we? I'll test it, and then you can be sure at the end. So then we're going to fold the elastic, fold the leg back that we're not going to be stitching, and we only need to, and we're going to start on the inside leg where the seam allowance is, that's the word I wanted. And we're going to just take a couple of, make sure your pins are out, the other pins are out the way, going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back. And then needle in the work because we need to be able to put some tension against this. So then we're going to then put fingers where the pin is and pull, let's just move my machine, and pull the tension on that elastic. Just make sure that you've got your zigzag line from before underneath it, if you're having to do this way, and then we're going to sew zigzags over the top. When you can't see any more, just stop and then just roll the fabric towards you, but don't take out the pin on that quarter until you get to it. So there I am at the quarter. So now I take my pin out, got my needle in the work, look, holding everything still, and I'm just rolling the pant, you know, the leg of the trouser round to me. Make sure your elastic is over the top of your zigzag lines, holding it open, just helping it through, and I've come to the next pin, so I can take that one out now. Fold it round, and then again just finish up. If you need to stop, just stop and readjust. Come to the last pin. This is going to be slightly wider. We can steam it in order to tighten the elastic up. The shearing elastic way will give you a tighter leg on your pantaloon. So if you have got it, or you're patient enough to wait for it to come through if you order some, then that will be better for you. When we come to the beginning again, just couple of stitches over the top of where you were. Let's take that thread out. And there we go. I suppose the other thing that we could have done is we could have threaded some ribbon through and had a little bow on the outside, couldn't we? That's the other thing that you could do, is thread a bow through the zigzags, a ribbon through the zigzags, and do that. So we've got a little nice little thread. So you can steam this elastic with just a bit of steam, and that will then just tighten it up again, because obviously it gets stretched whilst we're stitching it, but that will give you a tighter leg then. So let me just go and do the other one the same way that I've just done and steamed mine, and then I'll be able to come back to you and we'll be able to put them on Lillian for the final time. Okay, so when we're finished, this is what it looks like. Yes, we've got the 2 rows of zigzagging on mine, but on yours, hopefully you'll have everything all lovely and neat. And like I say, if you wanted to thread a ribbon through, you could always do a little bow on the side here for them. So let's pop these on to Lillian, who's been very patiently waiting to start and get dressed. Go nicely over her feet, that's good. Just put them up over her tummy. I'll turn you around and turn the camera around in a minute so you'll be able to see properly. But there's her lovely pantaloons. Oh, pantaloons are bloomers. That lovely lace trim on the bottom there, that fabric. Okay, let me turn the camera around. You'll be able to see a little bit better, won't you? Hold on one second. Okay, so here we are. Here's Lillian in her lovely, lovely pantaloons. Pantaloons, I keep saying that, don't I? Bloomers. Got nice, nice little frill around the bottom there from the elastic. And as I say, if you use the shearing elastic and thread it through as I said, then yours will come through a lot. You can make yours tighter, or even if you did that ribbon and then just tied them on the side, then you can do if yours is Lillian isn't going to be dressed and undressed too often. But they look really lovely and sweet. They fit her nicely, perfect length. And they should poke out the bottom of her dress just lovely when we get on to making that, because that's the next stage. The next stage will be that we'll be making her dress with the little collar on it and the lace front, in order that she can have a dress on top. And the dress is going to be in the same fabric as this white, and then we've got a lovely floral which is here, which is going to be for the top for her pinafore, which will be the next to last part, because the final part will be her circlet, her headdress. But for now, hopefully you've enjoyed stitching those along with me. And actually, you know, I mean, I know that if you've watched any of my other videos before, then you'll know that I'm always keen to point out where these skills are transferable. And in actual fact, you know, if you don't do the elastic bit at the bottom and the pattern's larger, you're making shorts, you know, either for yourself or for a child or for another character. So all the skills, turning down the waist, adding the elastic, doing the inside leg, all of those skills are exactly the same as to whether it's just the piece of fabric that are bigger. So, you know, whilst we're making dolls and we're dressing them, we're also picking up some really, really good and valuable tips that will help us if ever we want to change over and just cross over into making children's or adult garments and clothing. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me today. If you have, I'd love it if you give the video a thumbs up, or if you'd leave me a comment, that'd be great. And if you have enjoyed watching me today and you want to watch the rest of the videos, then if you become a subscriber, it doesn't cost you anything, but if you become a subscriber, then you can click on the notification bell as well, and when I upload a new video, you'll be the first one to know, because YouTube will send you out a notification email or a message just to say that that video's there for you, ready for you whenever you want to watch it. And these videos, you can come back to them time and time again, so even if it's a while since you've made any of these bloomers for your character, then you can come back time and time again to be able to watch them. My thanks to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls for the kit in order that I can bring this video to you, and thank you to you for watching and spending your valuable time with me, and I hope that you've enjoyed sewing with me today. Have a great day everybody, happy stitching, and I'll see you soon. Take care, bye.